There are things we just don't talk about.
Very good morning, Tone Andersen, now in Stockholm, but as you said, you are a nomad. So for those among our audience who do not know you, I would like to say first and foremost, welcome to Solidarity Tel Aviv Human Rights Film Festival. We're honored and it's a pleasure of having you and your film, When the Boys Return, 2012. So before we start, can you please say some words about yourself, where you come from, what is your film history, and how did you come to make this film?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. It's great that the film is still being shown, and it's great that it's shown at this particular festival. So that's wonderful. And a little bit about myself. I'm a Norwegian filmmaker. I started out as mostly a cinematographer and director doing documentaries. And after I finished my bachelor in film in England, I traveled to the West Bank, to Bethlehem, to work in a local TV station there. It was a Norwegian Palestinian exchange of media workers to promote free speech. So I was going to be a camera woman in a local TV station in Bethlehem, and two Palestinian journalists went to Oslo. So I ended up, my first 4 years after graduating, I was living and working in Bethlehem in the West Bank. So that's how I first got to know the area, and I guess it was the start of what ended up being this film in the end.
What drove you to come to Bethlehem or to this region?
I must be completely honest that when I came, I didn't know anything about Israel, Palestine, and the Middle East conflict. I was a newly graduated cinematographer, and I got a chance to work as a camera woman for a TV station for a year. So to be honest, I saw it as an adventure and as a possibility to work as a camera woman. And of course, it turned out to be much more than that. So that's, I jumped into it quite unknowingly, what I was going to meet and see there.
So you didn't come as a politically charged agent of, no, you came from film, from the passion of film.
I came as a filmmaker and wanting, like I actually, well, I don't think we're going to go too far back in my history, but I was more into fiction, and it was going to give me practice of being a camera woman and to get going in the field of cinematography, and then everything changed as soon as I landed in Bethlehem a few weeks before Operation Defensive Shield. So I came in a very particular period, I guess, in spring 2002, And right after I came, the TV station, the local TV station I was going to work for, was raided, and part of the equipment destroyed. So it was actually not operating for many months. And together with 2 other Norwegians who was also going to work for the TV station, we started going around talking to people and starting to work on what was to become 2 documentary films. And so during that first half a year, it was quite an intense period where also my interest in documentary film grew. And I started working on the first film I ever made, which was also a film from the West Bank about 3 young boys growing up in a refugee camp in Bethlehem.
That was before when the boys returned.
Yeah, this was 2003, so that's a long time ago. So to fast forward, I ended up staying, not working for that local TV station at all, but as a freelancer, working with films, but also working as a camera woman and editor for Norwegian broadcast news. So the first year we made this film about those 3 young boys, and a few years later, 2 out of the boys of 13, 14 years old were arrested. The ones that we had been filming were a couple of years later arrested, and that's how I started to be aware of the big what to call it, topic of children being arrested, well, particularly in the West Bank where I was based. So that was the first seed of that I wanted to make, to put focus on the theme, because, it was interesting to be in the Palestinian areas, and as you probably are aware of, it at least historically, it's got so much news coverage in Norway and in the Nordic countries. But I realized when I lived there how little my family and friends, how little people actually knew about it. Although every week it was on the news, it's very little details, knowledge about what's actually going on and how people there are living. So at the beginning, I wanted to make or I was asked actually to make a news report about child detainees, but I very soon got the wish to make something a bit more deeper, to spend more time on it, and go more into the theme that what can be done in a news report. So I actually started working to develop a film about this topic after I left the West Bank, and in 2007, and I started going back and forth, traveling to the West Bank to do research on the topic and to find the entry point or the framing of the story, like how I knew that I wanted to make a film touching on the topic, but exactly how to attack it, it took me a few years to figure out. Yeah.
We will get to that, but there's one aspect of you making this film, and more broadly of us making films in places that we are not organically related to, in the sense that, let me share a quick anecdote with you. 2.5 decades ago, I made a film about a border town in Israel. Well, I was not born there, even though I lived next to it for a few years. When I screened the film, people, or at least some people, became really angry with the fact that I'm not a native. And the question was, who are you to speak about us, for us, in our name? And I want to ask you about this innate problem of speaking among other communities which are on your. Is this a real problem? Is this a fake problem? Is this one of the acute problems of political correctness? Or or should we really worry about authentication of voices? Like, for example, in New Zealand, where if you're not native, you cannot make a film about native culture. You have to be a native. What's your take on it, and how did you deal with your strangeness, embedded strangeness in the situation?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting topic, and it's a problematic one. And at the time, well, I can only speak for myself. And at the time, I felt quite immersed in the, let's say, culture that I was filming within. Of course, I still didn't speak the language fluently, and you know, I cannot. Although I was living in the West Bank, I certainly was in a completely different situation than Palestinians there. I was free to go whenever I wanted. I can't say that I felt the conflict in the same way that natives do at all. And I think it's, I mean, I would say, like, for any documentary film, even if I'm making a film about my mother, it's always a question of how can you tell someone else's story. And
what do you think about it? I mean, how do you approach it in your own philosophical worldview? What do you think of this, of the place this problem occupies in our trade? And
yeah, I think it's. I find it very problematic at times. It's also the kinds of documentaries that I've been working on has been very character driven, and has meant being very involved with the characters of the film for a very long time and establishing a relationship, which is also kind of problematic because it's not a balanced relationship. You come in there with a camera and you have an agenda, but this friendship, which is fantastic to establish this friendship with the people you're making a film about, but at the same time, it's I've actually been thinking about it a lot the last few years when I haven't made documentaries over the last few years, and to reflect on it, it's something I'm thinking about, and I'm not quite sure what I feel about it, because it does feel, let's say it's an unbalanced relationship where one has more power than the other, and it feels like you're kind of going in, although you're open about making a film, it's a little bit different intentions of starting this relationship. You have a clear intention for the relationship, because in the end, as a filmmaker, what do we want? We want the people in front of the camera to relax with you, to open up with you. And to be honest, you want to be able to capture on camera intimate and close moments. So it is a topic that needs to be, like, considered very carefully, I think, before going into any kind of documentary film like this. Yeah.
I guess one question that is on the table and we cannot avoid is the question of context. Your film attempts, like so many films, like films do, they find protagonists and they try to be as intimate as possible with their lives and their hardships, etc. Here we are dealing with one of the most explosive political issues, universally explosive issues, child arrest and the occupation, the Israeli occupation, which is a word that does not exist any longer in the daily Israeli discourse. And then your film, as any drama does, try to focus on the immediate emotional moment or state of being of the protagonist. How did you, or did you not, try to balance the tension between the immediate, the personal, the narrow long shot and the wide angle of the context, the political context in this work?
Well, it must be said that when I set out to make this film, I wanted to cover all of it. And the film, as you see it now, is as you can see, very framed and very like close setting with this one therapy group. So that was a long process. I was developing it for 4 years before I went down to film, and I was actually trying. I was thinking my aim was to make this little story about children being or youth being rehabilitated into the society could raise questions rather than try to seek to tell the whole story. And of course, like showing it around different environments and festivals and getting feedback, I see that it brings quite different reactions depending on what audience it's shown to, and of course also depending on how much this audience knows about the conflict from before. And so I took a conscious decision that it would be, although the therapist or the social worker in the end plays quite a big part in the film, that it should be the story of these boys themselves and their daily struggle. And I was like the intention was to make something that a little bit more poetic, but still like the daily lives, and to have that speak of itself, like to show the daily struggles, and through that we will understand how this imprisonment has affected them. And one thing that I was very conscious about when I was filming, I still hadn't taken the choice of which three or which one of the boys should be the main characters. That was still a long process in the editing. So I was following several of the boys quite extensively over 4 months. But one thing that might be interesting to discuss is that I wanted, of course, I've seen a lot of films about the conflict and about Palestinians, etc., over the years, and my immediate wish was not to. There's so many. It's so easy to fall into the trap of sort of victimizing the victims, if you understand what I mean, like to show the tragedy and to just play on the tragedy and the emotions. And with such a topic, I could easily have looked for the most tragic stories and pushed to make a very sad film, if you know what I mean. And
is it a sad film for you in the sense of the tension between the hopeful and the depressing future we can foresee? After all, few of your protagonists were back in jail. It seems from your film that not much hope and futures awaits them by the nature of their own, the unfolding of their personal life and the circumstances. And I want to hear from you if you thought that you were playing your film to be optimistic or to show that there is a future to such a path of peace and nurturing hope, or did you mean to say whatever we're going to do, there's no hope here? What were your intentions on this?
My intentions were absolutely not like this, and that's why I also decided to follow the therapy group, because two things that I had as in the back of my head all the time was that, number one, I didn't want to show, I didn't want to have characters as like passive victims, because I don't think it's representative, and I wanted to show what, in my experience, is this incredible ability of people living under such conditions to actually continue living their lives despite all the restrictions and all the tragic things happening. And so I wanted to show strength and how do you call it, perseverance, or that, you know, that you're able to get up time after time and continue and try to live a normal life. And also I wanted to, I did not set out to make a tragic, depressing story. And my intentions, you know, it's interesting always to write scripts or treatments for documentaries because you never know what happens. And my intention was to show the boys' way back into society and back into their family lives again. And but of course, sitting in the editing room and getting reports that they are again arrested, it could not be left out of the film. Like that would be completely untrue. Or so it was never. In my mind, filming this, it would end with the optimistic note of the boys finishing their vocational training and maybe starting to work or going back to school. So it was definitely not the intention to find someone that would again and again be put back into prison. Now it must be said that Mohammed Jamil, the boy we followed the most, he has been in and out of prison 6 times.
Since?
After this, like the last update I had was last year, and then it had been six times in and out of prison. And I can also say a little bit about my thoughts when I was selecting characters. It was also, again, I could easily, there's endless of stories of very young boys, like 8-, 9-year-olds who've been to prison and who had very tragic stories, and boys who were never in a demonstration, who was arrested. But I also wanted to find characters that, how to say it, not necessarily, I don't know how to say that, but that had this boyish attitude that you can have all over the world, but set in a very particular setting, it can be explosive. So it's a boy that also had problems with his family, and that wasn't only dreaming about being a doctor. You know, I wanted to show, because that's also the part of the environment one grows up in, what hopes one have for the future, and what one, if one has plans or hopes for the future at all. So it was also conscious to show different kinds of stories within this 12 boys in the therapy group.
I want to dedicate a little time here about the issue of child arrest. It would seem to me that you have to be in a very, very peculiar state of mind to even think in your own mind that arresting children in general, and especially in this way, can be justified. I mean, I cannot even think of what can justify it. But on the other hand, I think that once the conceptual, the practical, the political umbrella is occupation, then like any presupposition that justifies the rest of the praxis that arranges it here as well, there are people and there is a regime that argues that in order to maintain what is now available, means have to be preceded. What would you respond to this view?
I'm not sure if I understood correctly, but you mean like the Israeli government's reasoning behind arresting children, or?
What I'm saying is this procedure is not a spontaneous act by crazy neighbor who got really mad and shouted at the neighbor. This is a procedure. This is a state procedure, and it is part of a larger discourse in the Israeli society about what is permitted and what is not, what is moral and what is not, what we have to do, what we could have done, what we ought to do, etc., etc. And as I said, it will hardly hold water if I say as a human being that it is appalling, it is against the law, etc., etc. Still, if you take a long shot at our political and civil discourse, you would hear voices that say, well, we have to do it. This is what has to be done, etc., and justified by 1, 2, 3, 4. And I wonder about, you know, these voices, you heard them, you know that Israeli society is split and divided, and I wonder about how you respond to such voices in your own mind and in public speech. I mean, I guess you were asked about it before.
Yeah, well, it is very interesting because it is so shocking when you come from a country far away from this conflict and you haven't grown up with anything similar. And I think, you know, without trying to do an in-depth political analysis, I think for me it was always fascinating to see how contact between Palestinians and Israelis were so opposed. And I think that's a big key of it, because like how, I don't, you know, I have to talk about the period I was there. I don't know how things have changed now, but when I was there, from the second Intifada and onwards, it was very difficult for Israelis to get into the West Bank. And I know of Israeli filmmakers and people who just had friends there who were, they had to sneak over the checkpoint to get in, and they were warned that they could be killed if they go into the dangerous areas. And I think that is a lot of the key to how one can justify that to arrest children because they are dangerous, they are small terrorists. If you manage to you know, because I think, and I would like to hear your thoughts about that, like if you manage to keep people separated overall, then you can build up this huge fear about the others and how they are so different from us, when actually I think it's quite the opposite actually. I think Israelis and Palestinians have so much in common, and I almost met twin souls from each side of the wall. So I'm thinking that's a big part of it. Once you can, and while I was there, the wall was starting to be built, and it just goes to show how it feels like it's been very important for the Israeli government to try to keep Israeli citizens as far away from Palestinians as possible, to work against any cooperations and contact. And yeah.
Earlier you said that you wanted your film to raise questions rather than make bold statements. Can you share with me a thought about what kind of question, for example, you wanted your film to raise?
Well, more, I think specifically I'm thinking that to raise a curiosity in the audience to figure out more, because I don't have the intention to explain all parts of the topic of child imprisonment in the film. So that was more in trying to raise a curiosity that people can go and read more about how many children are arrested every year, what happens in prison, how are the conditions in prison. Obviously, it's very hard to film inside the prison. I think also, like you can say, I mean, you could say throwing stones can be very dangerous. Throwing stones at cars, etc., etc. But also, I think one very important question is, what does it do to a generation growing up living with this uncertainty that you yourself or your brother or your son or your father can in theory be arrested at any point? Like that is the big picture that I'm taken away from this, you know, living there and knowing many families who had some family members arrested, that it seems to be so random, with nightly raids coming in the middle of the night. Like, I don't know if your audience will have seen the film while we're talking about this, or is this...
They have the option to see it even before we discuss. This can be a post-screening conversation.
Right.
So
yeah.
I hope that either they saw it or they will have the urge after a conversation to see it.
Yeah. Yeah. So as one of the boys are saying in the film, like his friend was arrested again, and he was sure that now they would come for him. So what did he do? He went to bed every night fully dressed, because he was ready to be dragged out in the middle of the night. And you know, it might seem like a small thing, but when you start thinking about it, in your teenage year, in your formative years, that's how you live your life, with that fear and uncertainty. It also, you know, I was talking about the Israelis not being able to go and get to know or cooperate with the Palestinians, but also the other way around. Growing up, the only Israelis you meet are these soldiers who can come in the middle of the night and drag you away from your family. I mean, it's just a crazy picture, and I think, I guess we can discuss about the real intentions for wanting peace in the area, but having a generation growing up with this, it's moving as far away from the peace process as possible, I think.
Before I ask you the last question, I just want to address one scene that really touched my heart, and that was one of the boys told about his relations with his little brother, with his younger brother, who, when he was trying to study, his brother would interfere and he would beat him. And the more he would beat him, the more he would interfere with his peace and quiet. And said, the more I do it, the more he does it. And this for me was a beautiful scene about human nature. The more you try, and he acknowledged the fact that there's no sense for him to beat him more, because he understands that he will continue. So there's an opposite axis of pragmatic achievement in that relationship. And it seemed to me that this scene is emblematic of the tragedy here. The more you oppress people, the more you impose violence on them, according to your own means of achieving something, it goes the opposite way. There's no way to suppress human spirit. I mean, it starts within the family, with the individual, and it rises up to the level of the state and the global relation. So it seems like an entire world politics was embedded in his acknowledgement of the uselessness of violence in its own sake. And from this sharing with you this beautifully cinematically filmed scene, I would like to ask you if you had the possibility or the option to do this film again now, would you do it differently? And if yes, what would you done differently?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's for me, it feels like it's a film that communicates best with audiences who are already, will be interesting to see because it's the first time we show it to an Israeli audience. Mm-hmm. But showing it in Norway and in Europe, it seems to communicate best with people who are already familiar with the area and the conflict. And so in that aspect, it might have been, if I did it again and trying to communicate with people who were completely unaware of the conflict, I might have considered to try to give more an overall picture of the situation and all the conditions the boys are living into. But it's hard to say. That's the great and the challenging thing with the documentary, because you can set out to do something and reality always takes you in a slightly different way. So yeah, always spend more time with them maybe. You know, there's things like when to stop a film. Yeah.
So I want to thank you for sharing with us your film and offering us the opportunity to put this important topic on the table and discuss. I mean, we merely launched the conversation, but it's so important for us to be able to negotiate the ideas that enable, that tragically enable it. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for your sharp observations and interesting questions. And I wish you all a good screening if you're watching the film after this. And
I hope many people will join us. And again, we hope to see you with your next film.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tone. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.